On November 26, 1980, 19-year-old Vanessa Blockett gave birth to a beautiful baby boy named David Ezell Blockett. He was her second baby, joining 2-year-old big brother Frederick. When David was just 15 days old, a woman showed up claiming to be a social worker with DSS. She stated that their organization was sponsoring a Christmas party at the Riverside Regional Medical Center in Newport News, Virginia. The woman convinced Vanessa to allow the boys to go with her to the party. Hours later, Frederick was found unharmed and wandering the streets, but David has never been seen again. My hope is that in highlighting the case today, the awareness could spark closure to this mystery of over 40 years. This is A Simpler Time True Crime, the abduction of David Blockett. It was December 11th, 1980. Vanessa Blockett was parenting 2 small children in that hazy new parenthood fog. She had a tiny newborn David and a 2-year-old son Frederick. Sadly, her partner and father of the boys, Fred West, was incarcerated on drug charges at the time of David's birth. They were still very close and together, and Fred was able to meet his tiny newborn son. That memory is one he cherishes still to this day. Thinking back to my early motherhood days, I remember the blur of those first sleepless nights, and I was older with built-in supports and help and lots of people around. Vanessa's mother, Shirley Blockett, was helping her daughter care for the boys as best as she could. She was the surprised person who opened the door on that chilly December morning in Newport News, Virginia, after a surprise ring of the doorbell. They weren't expecting anybody, and there standing before her was a woman, smiling and friendly. She was described as a black woman in her early to mid-30s, medium, clear complexion, a curvy figure through the hips, 5'4" to 5'8", and 145 to 155 pounds. That very specific description has probably given away to you that this woman is the suspect in this case. Spoiler alert, she is, but that's okay because this description of her is far more helpful than the composite sketch that exists for her at that time. Look, I know composite sketches can be hit or miss, but in my opinion, this one is one of the worst. It honestly looks like a cartoon character or caricature, and there's nothing distinguishing about it that would help me identify if I stumbled into this person at the grocery store or on the street. But I digress. The woman at the door introduced herself as Marie Kelly. She had a presence about her that seemed confident, and she acted as if they should be expecting her. She stated she was a social worker from the Department of Social Services, or DSS. She was wearing a badge off of a lanyard around her neck that had the DSS logo on it and the name Marie Kelly. She said she was there to pick up baby David to go to the Christmas party at Riverside Regional Hospital, an event the Department of Social Services was putting on. At this point, Vanessa had joined her mother at the door. Vanessa was surprised because she hadn't heard anything about this. Marie doubled down and actually looked at Vanessa confused, holding a piece of paper, which was a list of other newborns recently born at the hospital. This list looked official and part of a scheduled event. Sure enough, not only did Vanessa see David's name on there, she recognized the names of other neighborhood children on the list. The best way to describe the persuasion happening here is that this person of authority is making this mom feel like she has missed the memo, which again, I don't know how many parents here are listening, but the first 6 months of my children's life, I felt like I perpetually missed the memo. So she says something along the lines of, "Yep, here's planned, picking him up because there is actually going to be a contest. They do it for all babies born there, and they'll have their picture taken and it'll be put in the local paper." Vanessa clarified and asked, "Is this just for David? I have my son Frederick too." Marie stated that even though Frederick was not on the list, he was more than welcome to join. She shared that after this, she would be picking up some other children on the list, and they would be brought back after the event in just a few hours. The friendliness, attention to detail, official paperwork, and flexibility around bringing Frederick all seemed to lower the guard of Vanessa and her mother Shirley. Vanessa lovingly packed up a diaper bag for baby David and bundled up both boys in their winter coats and gloves. Frederick, who was probably getting sick of being cooped up with his newborn brother for a couple of weeks, was excited to go to the party. Vanessa kissed and hugged the boys goodbye. She handed David over to Marie and watched as Frederick skipped behind her and got into the car. Vanessa and Shirley took some time to themselves and didn't think too much about this until a call came in that would change their lives forever. About an hour after Marie had left with the boys, there was a call from a police officer in Hampton. This was about 10 miles southeast of Newport News and a 20-minute drive. Police were calling because a woman had found a little toddler boy wandering around the Todd Shopping Center, which still exists today. He was lost and had no adults around. When she stopped to help him, she found that he had a tiny slip of paper in his pocket that had his name and address on it. It was Frederick. As a parent myself, I cannot begin to fathom the feeling Vanessa must have had in the pit of her stomach. A mixture of confusion and relief that seemingly Frederick is okay and unharmed, but the very next question had to be, what about the baby? The police were unaware of what baby she was talking about, as only a 2-year-old boy had been found. David Blockett had vanished. As fast as she could confirm that the police were bringing Frederick back to her, she hung up and dialed the police in Newport News. She explained the situation and how her baby had been taken. Police jumped into action. They began to search the immediate area for David and canvass the neighborhood for witnesses. They kept officers at Vanessa's home in the event that any information should turn up there. They also had her work with a composite sketch artist while they worked to gather more information on Marie Kelly and this supposed party. While doing those steps, 3 pieces of critical information came to light. First, and probably not surprisingly, they found out that there was no Christmas party occurring at the medical center. There was also no Marie Kelly employed by DSS, and DSS was not involved in sponsoring any local event for children born at the hospital. This was all used as a ruse to kidnap baby David. Secondly, a woman in the neighborhood said that she thinks she encountered the same woman as Vanessa. This woman had also recently given birth. That very same morning, a woman matching Marie's description came to her house too. She gave the same fabricated story about needing to bring her baby to the Christmas party her department was hosting. The mother said something just felt off about her, and she told this woman to go away. She closed the door, locked it, and didn't think much more of the strange encounter until the police came knocking at her door. Police realized that the commonality was that both mothers had birth announcements in the local paper a few days prior. Back then in this area, the practice was to put the full name and address in the birth announcement in the local paper, likely to make it easier to send cards and well wishes. We know better now. But then this wasn't looked at as a security concern and gave direct access to people with bad intentions. So again, this may have been a simpler time, but was it a safer one? In fact, nowadays, it's even commonplace to avoid things like "it's a boy" signs in the yard or pink and blue balloons on a mailbox. Of note, can you imagine the mixture of emotions this mother must have felt processing this information? Knowing how close her own baby had been to being abducted, and then the sadness of knowing a neighborhood mother was now experiencing this pain and panic? Finally, as Vanessa was waiting at her home with police, the phone rang. When Vanessa picked up, a woman's voice was on the other end of the phone, and it sounded familiar, just like the voice of Marie Kelly that morning. The woman quickly asked what kind of formula the baby had been taking. That question was all the woman spoke, and she quickly hung up. Police tried to trace the call, but in 1980, the call had to last for quite a while to be able to be traced. Unlike today, where this information can quickly be tracked down, this process back then required tracing engineers, and any disruption or hang-up call could ruin the process and render it unsuccessful. This call would be the final correspondence Vanessa would have with the kidnapper. On December 23rd, a motorist on the Colonial Parkway in Yorktown, 16 miles north of Newport News, found a baby's diaper bag discarded on the side of the road. It was the same diaper bag that Vanessa had carefully packed and handed off on the morning of his disappearance. The diaper bag contained his baby booties, his little baby blankie, sweater, jeans, and a comb with hair on it. Alongside it was also a leather folder believed to belong to the woman who called herself Marie, possibly the folder she was carrying the fake information relating to the hospital party hoax. One thing I want to address with this case, and a big reason for me wanting to cover it, is that in the very little information that is out there in the case, the commentary surrounding it is very cruel towards Vanessa. There is a whole bunch of, how could she just give her baby away to a stranger, and I would never do that. What is wrong with this mother? One thing that is always certain to rear its head in humanity is otherness. It's easier to say that you would never do something and shame a person for their behavior, because then you can comfort yourself and lead yourself to believe that something like this could never happen to you. But we need to take a moment to put ourselves in her shoes. As I mentioned, even though she is in a relationship, she's functioning as a single parent of a newborn and a toddler and is only a teenager herself, barely an adult. This woman presents confidently with convincing credentialing and a carefully crafted story. This Marie person is coming across as very friendly and kind, but also chose the Department of Social Services as the employer attached to her fabricated story. It's my opinion that this was very calculated and intentional. The suspect is a Black woman, as is Vanessa. Historically, the Department of Social Services has a reputation for systemic inequitable practices surrounding Black families and mothers in particular, in contrast to the white families of the same communities they serve. I want to be clear that individual social workers and workers of DSS are not villains in a story, and the work that DSS workers do is very important. However, it's important to acknowledge these systemic issues, particularly around this time period, and weigh into how that position of authority to a new mother may have played a role in Vanessa's decision to give baby David over to who she thought was a social worker that day. According to a 2022 article by Shireen White and Stephanie Marie Person for the American Bar Association, Black children in the United States experience disproportionate involvement in the child welfare system, with higher rates of investigation, removal from their parents, and termination of parental rights compared to white children. According to that same article, quote, Black families face discrimination and unequal outcomes at every stage of the child welfare system. And once placed into foster care, Black children are moved more often, receive fewer appropriate services, and then are 4 times less likely to be reunited with their families than white children." End quote. The article is a really important read, and I've linked it in the show notes. So yes, when all of this is taken into play, in addition to all the other reasons I've already mentioned, Vanessa may have felt a lot of fear saying no to a person from that government entity for fear of getting on their radar and having her children taken away. A devastating irony. As the years passed, Vanessa had to live with the fact that the little boy she had given birth to was no longer a baby. As those childhood years turned into what would be teen years, she held out all the hope that she could, that he would somehow walk back through her doors. In a Freelance Star article, she said, quote, "I know David's coming back. Next time I see him, he might not be a child, he might be a young man, but someday there will be a knock on my door and my boy will be home." End quote. But that would never come to be. In 1997, at just age 36, Vanessa died of a brain aneurysm. Fred West, her former partner and father of the boys, said he felt she died of a broken heart as well. In the early days of the search, Fred West begged the jail to let him out so he could go look for his son, but they wouldn't allow it. When he did get out, he and Vanessa tried to connect through the tragedy and rebuild their life together, but the grief hanging over them tore them apart. Fred has struggled with drugs and other issues in his adult life, which he admits have at times been fueled by loss and grief. He has been in and out of prison, but desperately holds out hope for the return of his baby boy. The case largely sat cold, but in the mid-2000s, a reporter for a local news station, Channel 3 WTKR, had a reporter named Jessica Larche. She stumbled into David's case and made it her mission to bring attention to it. The work she did as a reporter on this case is incredibly admirable. I've linked multiple articles in the show notes, and I'd encourage you to check them all out. She has interviews with David's father, brother, and highlights all of the recent developments. Developments largely initiated by her. The attention she drew to the case prompted the police department to reassign a detective to the case for a fresh set of eyes. Newport News detective Amber Rogers was on the case. She began to go through old case notes, interviews, and evidence, as well as re-interview crucial people. One such witness was little Frederick. Although only 2 at the time, he has some very important memories to this day. He recalls memories of sitting in the back seat of a car that day. He remembered the social worker being in the passenger seat and that it was driven by a man. Neither adult would look at him directly. He remembers holding a cassette tape in his hand and playing around with it. Sadly, he also remembers suddenly just wandering around alone and scared. Frederick is desperately hoping for his brother to come back. Asked what he would do if he saw his brother today, Frederick said, quote, "I run up to him and give him a big hug, and tell him that I love him and, I'm glad to see him," end quote. In going through old evidence, Detective Rogers had a huge win. The diaper bag, along with all of its contents and the hair sample, had been preserved. DNA testing wasn't around in the 80s, but today that hair sample could lead to David or his abductor. Besides who did this, the other main question is, why? Foul play is not suspected in this case. The 2 main theories are that David was the victim of human trafficking and a black market adoption ring, or he was abducted to be raised by the abductor. According to David Lowry of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, newborn abductions have a common theme. He says, quote, Typically, they take the children because of a husband or loved one that they're trying to convince they're pregnant, and they're trying to produce a child. Quote, Detective Rogers says a few pieces of evidence lead her in the direction that the perpetrator intended to raise David as her own. First is the call about the baby formula. It would be unlikely that somebody who was trying to put the baby up for adoption somewhere would really take the time to care about the baby's formula and making sure it agreed with the baby's stomach. This would be something that someone who is hoping to care for the child would want to know so that they could remain consistent with what the baby had already been having to eat. Second, putting the name and address of Frederick in his pocket. Don't get me wrong, the fact that they just left Frederick was absolutely cruel and heartless, and this whole thing is terrible. But the fact that she took the time to make sure Frederick was going to get home safely added risk to what she was doing, and likely was because she truly didn't want to harm the child and really was just insistent on getting a baby to raise on her own. The third thing that pointed in this direction was the use of the baby announcements in the paper. It was just very clear that this woman was looking for a tiny infant that she could raise from birth. And I guess arguably you could say that someone would use that same methodology to kidnap a child for human trafficking. It's just a very risky way to do it. Sadly, David is not an outlier. He is one of many infant abductions, and I want to highlight a few more of those cases so we can look at the patterns and discuss how this has changed over time. Emmanuel Khalif Burtz was just 5 weeks old when he was abducted in 1989 from the care of his grandmother. According to the Charlie Project, a woman came to his house and identified herself as a social worker named Deborah Manning. She claimed to be there on a home visit follow-up due to the fact that Emmanuel had been discharged with an eye infection. He really had an eye infection, and so the family took this to be legitimate. This first home visit was on August 12th, and her return visit was on September 12th. This time, she claimed that there was a possibility Emmanuel was infected with the HIV virus. Emmanuel's mother had used drugs during her pregnancy, and so she felt this was plausible. This person, who called herself Deborah Manning, took him to the hospital and claimed that she would be back in just a couple of hours. But she never actually did go to the hospital, and she never came back. As police looked into this, they realized that there was no social worker named Deborah Manning and that everything had been fabricated. He has never been found. Andre Terrence Bryant was just a month old when he was abducted from Brooklyn, New York. His mother, Monique Rivera, had been befriended by a couple of women when she was pushing him in his stroller around a park. They took her out shopping and hit it off so much that they said they wanted to go shopping with her the next day. Monique was so excited that she got a babysitter for Andre and her other 2 toddler children. However, when the 2 women showed up the next day, they didn't actually come to the door. Instead, they called from a payphone around a corner, and they insisted that Monique bring Andre with her because he was just so cute and they might as well bring him shopping. They asked Monique to come around the corner and meet them in their vehicle. She said goodbye to her older children and scooped up Andre and walked to the waiting van. Nobody would ever see Monique Rivera alive again, as her body was found a few days later. She had been brutally murdered, and Andre was never seen again. Due to the timing and location of this, there has been some speculation that this abduction was related to Shane Walker and Christopher Dansby, 2 toddlers who were abducted in a Harlem park 3 months apart in 1989. It is believed that Shane and Christopher were likely sold into some sort of black market adoption ring. There's nothing that's ever proven or disproven that, and those 2 boys remain missing to this day as well. Raymond Lamar Green Jr. was just 5 days old on November 6, 1978, when he was abducted. Raymond's mother, Donna Green, met an African-American woman while she was watching Raymond through the nursery window at Grady Memorial Hospital after his birth. The woman, who called herself Lisa Morris, fell into conversation with Donna and said she was visiting her sister who had just given birth. Lisa continued to visit Donna in her room, and the two got to know each other. They visited a bit more, and when it was time for Donna to be discharged from the hospital with baby Raymond, she asked if Lisa could give her a ride home. This let Lisa know where she lived, and she showed up unannounced to Donna's house the next day. At that time, Raymond's uncle was there visiting as well with another small child. Comfortable with having her own relative in the house, as well as the welcome relief of her new friend she had met at the hospital, Donna took a well-deserved shower in peace. When Donna came out, Lisa and Raymond were nowhere to be seen. When she asked Raymond's uncle where they were, he said that Raymond was getting fussy and that Lisa had taken him outside to walk around with him. She ran outside to look for them, and there was no trace of them anywhere. So she panicked and started asking the neighbors what they had seen. They shared that they saw a woman matching Lisa's description get into another vehicle while holding a baby. The vehicle was driven by a man, and the couple quickly pulled away. Nobody has ever seen the woman who called herself Lisa Morris or baby Raymond ever again. Authorities determined all the information she previously provided Donna was false. Nobody with a sister named Lisa Morris had given birth at Grady Memorial Hospital, and there was no one by the name in the Atlanta area who matched the physical description of the abductor. Donnell Jacoby Minor was 2 months old when he was abducted by a stranger from his Inglewood, California home on December 20th, 1984. Donnell was abducted from his mother's apartment. His mother, Deanna, had previously had a photographic portrait made of the baby. An unidentified Caucasian male arrived at the house on December 20th, claiming to have photos in his black briefcase. Deanna Trammell let him inside. Donnell was asleep at the time. While he was there, the man asked for a drink of water. Deanna left the room to get the man a glass of water, and when she returned, both the man and Donnell were gone. Several area portrait businesses had sent salespeople door to door offering to take and sell holiday portraits, but none of them could be linked to Donnell's abduction. Donnell has never been seen again, and his abductor has never been identified. Elias Jr. Monroy was abducted at 2 weeks old on February 2, 1987. His mom had brought him to his 2-week well visit, and he was just getting his regular checkup. While they were sitting in the waiting room, a young woman struck up a friendly conversation with his mother. She was still recovering from her cesarean section and having trouble getting around well. Elias began to cry, and the woman offered to hold him, while his mother went to go in search of formula to feed him. When his mother returned with the bottle to feed the baby, both the woman and Elias were gone. Investigators investigating Elias's abduction found a similar incident about 45 minutes away in California 2.5 weeks earlier, but that was an unsuccessful attempt. Elias's abductor and baby Elias have never been seen again. Marlene Santana was just 3 days old when she was abducted on October 21st, 1985. Marlene's mother, Francisca, had met the abductor at Brookdale Hospital shortly after giving birth, 3 days prior to the abduction. She had been looking through the nursery window, and the woman admired the baby, saying, "That is the prettiest baby and the quietest one." Marlene had to be kept in the hospital a little longer than usual due to jaundice, but was eventually discharged with a clean bill of health. Her mom, Francisca, walked outside with her, with the child wrapped in a blue, pink, and yellow swaddling blanket. As Francisca walked outside, the same woman who had befriended her previously walked up to her and drew a gun. The suspect threatened to shoot Marlene if the mother did not give the baby up. The two women walked for 6 blocks together, with the suspect pointing a gun at Marlene the entire time. The trio then stopped at a deserted junkyard, and the suspect took the baby. The mother gave the abductor her telephone number and begged her to call her. The kidnapper escaped in a waiting car driven by an accomplice. Baby Marlene has never been seen again, and the suspect has never been identified. Just as a side note here, today's hospital policies would largely prevent this. The person who just gave birth is typically taken outside by a hospital staff in a wheelchair, where they are then required to be driven home by somebody. Juan Jose Tristan was 1 month old when he was abducted in August of 1987. Juan and his mother, Cristina Torres, were going through some difficult financial times and living at the Senator Hotel in the 700 block of South Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, California. Sadly, like a lot of people, Juan's mother was having to try to get back to work even though she had just given birth. She had a job interview and nobody to watch her son, so she left her son in the care of a babysitter whom she just met and knew only as Maria. Torres was supposed to meet Maria and the baby in that afternoon at Pershing Park Square in the 500 block of South Olive Street. This was just a few blocks from the Senator Hotel. When she arrived for the scheduled meeting time, however, both the baby and the woman who she had just met were gone. All of these cases are breaking my heart, but this one really struck a nerve. If our country both then and now prioritized the health care of the people who just gave birth and their babies, she wouldn't have had to be looking around for a job when her baby was just a few weeks old. Cristina would have been able to be home recuperating and caring for her small baby, and this never would have happened. Instead, because of poverty, she was forced to look for work and forced to leave her child with somebody who she was unfamiliar with. These are just a few of the cases of infant abduction, and the ones I just highlighted don't have any answers or resolution. That's not always the case, though. Some of these do have happy endings. Happy, I suppose, amongst a patchwork of grief over lost memories and lost time, but reunited nonetheless. They have similarities to David's, which is why I think his case still has hope. Camilla Mobley was born on July 10, 1998 in Florida. Gloria Williams admitted she acted alone in 1998 when she walked into a Florida hospital dressed as a nurse and walked out with the newborn, whose name was Camilla Mobley. She relocated to South Carolina and renamed the baby Alexis. It was observed that dressing as a nurse was a common practice of women who stole babies from hospitals. Now, hospitals are required to have policies and procedures around infant safety, and around 80% of hospitals in the U.S. now use both electronic tagging for babies and an ID banding system for parents. The electronic tagging system sends an alert if a baby is moved out of the maternity ward, while the ID bands verify parents' identities. Hospital employees also wear special identification that makes it easy for parents to identify them as someone authorized to hold or transport their baby. In the case of Camilla, Gloria Williams was so close to being caught. She tried walking out with the baby in her nurse's uniform, and a couple of nurses running by with another patient in labor noticed her holding the baby, and they shouted to her that it was against protocol to walk around arm holding, but rather the baby should be transported in the little bassinet. Undeterred, Gloria ducked back into the room, chatted up the parents a little bit more, and waited for the coast to clear. Once she saw nobody in the hallway, she ducked back out and left. In 2017, the case made headlines when police had a tip. They said police received DNA confirmation that an 18-year-old woman with the same birthday as Camilla but a different name had fraudulent documents and was living in Walterboro. How this all came to be was that Camilla, who was going by Alexis, wanted to get her driver's license, but she didn't have the proper legal documents like her birth certificate or social security card. When she asked her mother for them, she provided her some, but they were fraudulent, as she found out. What we do know is that Gloria at least partially confessed to Camilla, but we don't know exactly what story she told her. Whatever story she did tell her, Camilla confided in a friend, who then placed the anonymous tip to police. Camilla was overwhelmed to learn her true identity. She had been living as Alexis alongside her two siblings. She had been well taken care of, graduated high school, and had a boyfriend. She was excited to meet her birth family, but she defended Gloria Williams, whom she described as a gentle woman, and she said in an ABC News article, quote, "She loved me for 18 years. She raised me for 18 years. I will always love her," end quote. As of this recording, Camilla still goes by the name Alexis. Police say that Gloria Williams had been escaping an abusive relationship and had recently miscarried days before, possibly prompting the abduction. In 2022, Melissa Highsmith was reunited with her mother Alta and father Jeffrey after 51 years. On August 23, 1971, Melissa was kidnapped from their Texas apartment. She had been kidnapped by her babysitter and given the name Melanie Walden. Decades passed, and Melissa did a 23andMe DNA kit swab. Unbeknownst to her, her father Jeffrey had done a 23andMe test with the distinct hope that he'd find his daughter. The match reunited the mother, father, and daughter who had been living 20 minutes from each other this entire time. Melissa said the woman who raised her was never really kind to her, and she was elated to reunite with her birth family. So much so that at the time of a 2022 article that was written, Melissa wanted to remarry her husband so that her biological father could walk her down the aisle. Absolutely amazing to me that they were able to reunite after so many years had passed. Possibly the most famous one that we know about is Carlina White. She was raised as Nettie Nance after she was abducted on August 4th, 1987 from a Harlem hospital. She was 19 days old, and she had been readmitted to the hospital from complications she was still suffering from her birth. She had swallowed amniotic fluid during her delivery, and she had an extended infection that was being treated. Once again, a woman dressed as a nurse came in and befriended the family. Witnesses actually saw somebody matching her description wandering around the hospital in the weeks leading up to the abduction, so I'm not entirely sure why this didn't draw more red flags than it did. Sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 3:55 a.m., somebody removed the IV line where she was receiving antibiotics and abducted her. This occurred when the nurse shift change was happening. In 2005, Carlina White was pregnant with her own daughter, and she requested that her mother obtain her birth certificate so that she could get health insurance. Her mother acquired a forged Connecticut birth certificate, which White attempted to use as proof of identity so she could obtain the health insurance she needed, but officials told her that the document was forged. Carlina was in a state of shock. Later that evening, she confronted the woman who raised her as her mother. Her mother broke down and confessed that she was not actually White's biological mother. This wasn't actually all that surprising to Carlina because she began to notice that she didn't share physical traits with her. However, the woman did not come completely clean. She told White that she had been abandoned by a drug addict and she had taken her in. Not completely settled with the answer, at age 23, White used websites such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where she found images of the kidnapped Carlina, and she realized that she looked like her and her baby daughter. She called the center's hotline and was able to contact her birth family. DNA profiling confirmed that she was the missing Carlina White. This was the year 2011. So given all of those parallels between the unsolved cases and the ones who had the happy ending, let's discuss some commonalities. According to an ABC News article on infant abductions and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC has confirmed 325 cases of infant abduction. Nearly all of the abductions are female abductors. In analyzing those abductions, they've discovered not only do many abductors use similar tactics to steal babies, like dressing as a nurse, but almost all of them do fit a similar profile. Many women who steal babies do so in a desperate attempt to keep a boyfriend or husband they fear may leave them if they don't have a child to bind them together. They are usually of childbearing age and may already have children at home. They may pretend to be pregnant, and they may have recently lost a baby due to miscarriage, or they may suffer from a medical condition that prevents them from becoming pregnant themselves. They may also visit hospital nurseries while they're planning their abduction to ask questions about procedures and case the layout of the maternity floor. They might even become familiar with hospital staff and may even be friendly to the victim's parents. This is not an exhaustive list, but just some of the common themes that have been identified in studying these cases. As for baby David, the hope is that he can be one of those success stories. There is a very high likelihood that David is still out there alive and unaware he is a missing child. David, maybe you've questioned your identity. Maybe some of the paperwork you've been provided hasn't seemed legitimate or has given you trouble. They may appear distorted or altered. Maybe your childhood and birth stories seem inconsistent, or your family is evasive on the topic. If you're having doubts, reach out. Submit your DNA through one of the sites like 23andMe or Ancestry, or reach out to authorities with your suspicions. Also, the possibility that you're the relative of somebody who has acted strangely around a baby that they had. Maybe they've exhibited some of the traits we previously discussed, or some of their story around their pregnancy and birth just hasn't added up. Speaking up and coming forward can make all the difference in these cases and can be the one missing clue that leads to a happy ending. David had some distinctive marks on his body as a newborn. He had a mole in his right ear and birthmarks on his left arm, back, and buttocks. I'll leave with this quote from Fred West, David's father. If you're out there, David, if you're hearing me, know that you're loved and you're missed, and everybody wants to see you come home. David would be 43 years old if still alive at the time of this recording. If you have any information about David or the mystery woman, take action and call the Newport News Police at 757-928-4200. This has been a Simpler Time True Crime. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow our Instagram page at Simpler Time Crime Pod.